I'm Krista, and today I'm going to be teaching you how to make your very own watercolor cactus artwork. I'll walk you through step by step how to make the whole thing, and it's a super fun and relatively easy project to do. I hope that you have a great time making it and enjoy this video. So before we get started with actually making the artwork, I'm just going to walk you through all of the supplies that you'll need to make this yourself. The first thing you're going to need is a reference photo. I just have mine here on this iPad. I'll include a link below this video of if you want to use the exact same photo that I'm using, you're welcome to do that. If you want to look up your own, there's a lot of really good online resources where you can find a high quality photo. Pexels is a really good one, that's where I found my photo. Also, Unsplash and Pixabay are two other really good resources. This is my photo, just a cute little cactus. You're also going to need a piece of watercolor paper. I trimmed mine down to 8 by 10 inches because I'm going to be putting it in an 8 by 10 inch picture frame later. You will need watercolor paints. You'll need clean paintbrushes. I would recommend having 3 different sizes for this project. I would recommend having a brush that's about this size. You can see compared to my fingernail how big it is. And this brush will be really good for filling in broader areas of the paper. And then I would recommend having a brush that's closer to this medium size, and that'll be good for getting some sharp edges. And then I would also recommend having a really fine brush like this one, and that'll be really good for if you have any really fine small details that you want to do. This brush will be your best friend. You're going to need some kind of container to put water in. You're also going to need some paper towels. These are always something I like to have when I'm using any kind of a wet art medium. Just because some kind of mishap happens, maybe I knock over the water jar, maybe I spill a little paint. Just in case something like that happens, you don't have to run around looking for paper towels, you have them right there. The other thing that can be nice about these is if you have a big puddle of watercolor paint that ends up on your page, you can just stick the corner of this paper into the puddle, and that'll help you soak up a lot of that liquid. And then finally, these can just be nice for getting any extra liquid off of your paintbrushes. You're also gonna need just a blank piece of scrap paper. I would recommend using the thickest paper that you have because you're actually gonna be using this paper to mix your colors. So if you have a thicker paper, that's gonna be a lot more durable. And I'm actually not going to follow my advice. I'm just going to use a really flimsy, cheapo printer paper. And you'll actually see through the course of the video, I've done it before with printer paper, so I know that it's doable. But especially if you're new with watercolors, I would not recommend using a piece of paper this thin. This is optional. You do not need a palette for this project. But if you do have one, I would recommend using that because you can mix your colors in these little individual divots. They won't run anywhere, they won't soak in. You won't have to keep remixing your colors as much as you will if you're using a sheet of paper like I'm going to. But just in case you don't have a palette, never fear, you can totally do it with a piece of paper, and that's what I'll be showing you how to do today. You're also gonna need a just basic graphite pencil and an eraser, a good eraser. Any pencil that you would typically use for writing is fine. Usually those pencils are a 2H lead, which is a pretty light, hard lead. That H literally stands for hard. And the reason I would recommend using a harder, lighter lead for this project is because it's not very drawing heavy. Really, you're only going to use this pencil to create the framework of what your artwork is going to look like. And then finally, you're just going to need a basic black ballpoint pen. And one more thing that I also like to have, but is another thing which is totally optional, is I like to have a big sheet of paper that I put under my work surface just so that I don't get any paint or anything on the table. So I have just a big piece of butcher type paper right here. I'll be putting this under my watercolor. The very first thing that I'm going to do before doing any painting is I'm just gonna do a light pencil drawing of the cacti. So some things I'm gonna be thinking about while I'm doing the drawing is thinking about the size of my paper, how big I want the drawing to be on my paper. Do I want to do a tiny little cactus way off in the corner of my paper? Or do I want to do a big cactus that fills up the whole paper? For this one, I want to do kind of a medium large size cactus. So I'm going to trace out, okay, this is how high I want my cactus to be. Here is the bottom. Here is the top. Having an idea of how tall you want your cactus to be or how wide you want your cactus to be can give you then a framework for the whole rest of your drawing. Because if I know that the cactus is this tall, from here to here, well, I also know that the pot, if I'm looking at my reference photo, the pot starts a little more than halfway up. So I'm going to look at my reference photo, look at my page, figure out, okay, this is about where the rim of the pot starts. I will trace that, and I can also see that the width of the pot is a little less than half of the height. So I'm going to trace out the lip of my pot just gently, gently, gently with my graphite pencil. Okay, I think that rim is looking pretty good. So that gives me then a reference for all kinds of things, because I know that the cactus on the far left touches the edge of the pot, and I'm going to draw that, have it coming up. One thing you can do, which can be nice and kind of take off some of the pressure, is you can actually draw just the general forms of what you see before you even start getting into the details. So right now with these cacti, I'm going to do that. I'm going to start with this kind of little squat cactus in the front. So now I will go to the cactus on the right. It's about the same width as the very front center small cactus, so I'm gonna make sure that I keep that width the same. Then I will do this really tall, funky cactus here. It kind of has like a curve on one side and then comes up. And that's the tallest point of my whole composition. So that, the top of that cactus, that's where when I do that little tick mark on the page before, that's where that tick mark is going to be level to, is the top of that cactus. And then that brings me to my last cactus. So now I'm starting to get a little bit of an idea of what my cactuses are going to look like on the page. The basics of what I'm doing right now is I am looking at what things look like compared to other things. So how wide is this cactus compared to my pot? How wide is it compared to another cactus? How tall is my pot compared to the whole height of everything that's going on? So if you're thinking about those things, it'll help you to get a pretty accurate drawing. So back into drawing. So I'm going to draw the inside rim of the pot. I'm going to start drawing that top lip of the pot. And then I'm not going to draw all of this because it's not very dark in the picture, and so I will just indicate it with some paint and some color later. So you can see that that rim really comes all the way around the front. Now the easy part, I'm just going to draw the slope of the side of that pot. And pay attention to the angle of that. Okay, I'm going to have it come down symmetrically on the other side and then finish off with a curve at the bottom. So now all that's really left to do, there's some dirt in the pots. You can tell there's maybe some mulch or something in there. So I'm just gonna do a few little kind of loose shapes at the bottom of my pot to show there's some kind of mulchy dirt in there. And now I'll go back to my cactuses and start to shape them a little more. So this front cactus, you can see it has kind of a flat edge on the left top side. I'll draw that in. You can see it comes down in a pretty even curve, but it kind of bounces back and forth actually. With this particular style, I'm not gonna worry at all about the cactus needles because we're gonna actually add those in at the end with ballpoint pen. So right now we're really just creating outlines so that we know where we need to fill in our paint. There's my front cactus, and yeah, that looks pretty good. I'll do the next cactus. I'll do the one on the far left. Get this giant, large cactus, not the tall one, but the other one that's just kind of a chunky cactus back here. And you know what I'm realizing is I drew this back cactus way too small. So now I'm at a dilemma. Do I want to redraw all my cactuses, or do I want to redraw the one cactus and have it be a weird composition and close to the top of my paper? I'm actually going to keep it the height that it is because maybe a little taller. Yeah, I'm going to go a little taller because the point of this piece is not to have a perfect form of a cactus. It's really just to create something fun and beautiful. And so I'm not going to worry too much about the fact that my cactus is not exactly the right proportion in the back there. But I do want to use the reference just to help me get some good looking cactuses. So that finishes up the pencil drawing. Now we're ready to move on to the painting part of the artwork. It's a pretty simple color palette for this. I'm going to start by mixing the greens of the cactus, mainly just because it can be easy sometimes to smudge the watercolor with your hand when it's not dry. Working from top to bottom can be a good way to remedy that. So I'm going to start by taking my medium-sized brush here, and now you'll get to see what I was talking about before with this cheapo scrap piece of paper. I'm going to start by choosing just a medium green color. I could go with this green, but I think it has a little bit too cool of a tone. I don't want it to be too cool for this medium color. So I'm gonna get some dark green loaded up on my brush. I'm gonna see what that looks like. It looks pretty good. It's a little dark for what I want, so I'm gonna add a little bit of yellow. Add that. Now it's a little too yellow, so I'm gonna add a little more green. Get a good puddle of medium green there. So this is a nice way to do it on this scrap piece of paper for people who don't have a palette. You could do it with a bunch of little plastic bowls if you wanted to. You could use a plate. Just be careful that the colors don't run into each other. All right, so now I'm just gonna take my medium green and I'm gonna look at my reference photo, try and figure out what areas have a medium green color. So I'm gonna start by painting just like right here. It's like a pretty pale green. Not super saturated, but kind of like that right now for this artwork. If you did want yours to be more saturated, if you're experiencing the same thing I am, but you didn't want to keep it saturated, you could just dip your brush back into the paint cake, rub it in the cake of paint, and that'll that'll help. All right, I've got a really quick mix of yellow, green color because I want to blend these while they're still wet. So I'm just a slightly more yellow color. I'm gonna back into the area that I just was, and the way that you blend the colors, this is one way to do it, is you paint down one color wet, and then while it's still wet, you paint the other color right next to it. And because the paints are still wet, it allows kind of this natural bleed to happen. It's really nice. Okay, that's a little bit too wet, so I'm actually going to take one of my handy paper towels, rip off a little piece, and just soak up some of that paint. And if you're following along with the same photo that I'm using, you can see that the color gets kind of really dark at the bottom of the far left cactus. So I'm actually going to mix kind of a dark green. And my paper is starting to disintegrate a little bit where I'm mixing these colors, but that's okay. I knew what I was getting myself into. So I'm just gonna get in there with my dark green, and that's nice. I want to kind of blend it a little, so I'm gonna dry my brush, use that paper towel, and I'll just kind of, with a dry brush, I'll just kind of work it into the paint that was already on the page. Okay, that's looking pretty good. This next fin is interesting. It has actually like a kind of bluish color. So I'm gonna add a little bit of blue. Just a little bit of blue, more green. That's too blue. Okay, that's a good color. I'm going to get this kind of blue-green color in there. And then just like before, I'm gonna blot my brush, clean it off, dry it off, and then blend those colors with the dry brush. Mixing the colors so precisely is a pretty advanced way to be doing this. So if you don't really care about having the colors exactly the way they are, pick a green that you like and then choose that as your medium green. And then any areas that aren't super bright or super dark, you can just paint them that medium green. Then, if you have any colors that you notice that are very dark, you can mix a single color to represent all of your darks. And then you can do the same thing with a light. Pick a light color that you like. I do actually really enjoy color mixing. And the reason I'm doing these videos is because I really enjoy teaching. I really also am very passionate about art. And so anybody is interested to learn how to mix colors and whatnot, I like including that. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. You can just mix up your 3 basic colors. There is no shame in that at all, because maybe you're someone who just wants a cute piece of artwork and you don't really care about mixing that green blue to be so perfect. That's the cacti painted. Now it's time for the pot. If you're using the same picture that I'm using, the pot has kind of like a reddish clay color. So I'm mixing this orange, you can probably see right now. That's a little too orange, so I'm gonna add a little bit of red, this kind of deep red color here. Now that's a little too red, so I'm actually gonna add some pink here and some more of this orange and this rust color. And I think that's okay. Oh gosh, that was really dark. Let's try this again. Let's do orange. Let's do a little bit of pink. And you know, I actually like that color. I'm just gonna stick with that color. This is gonna be the inside of the rim of the pot. I'm just gonna do, there's not a lot of variation of color there. I'm just gonna do a line and a line. You can see where that paint is pooling at the end, so I'm just gonna take my little paper towel, soak it up. Good. So it's going to be a pretty similar color for the rim of the pot, but just a lot lighter. So I'm actually just going to, I was going to recycle that color, but again, with the cheapo paper, it's easier said than done sometimes. I will take it over here, hasn't soaked in, mix it with a bunch of water and get this really light peachy color. And that is what I'm going to use for a couple things. I'm going to use it for the underside of the rim of my pot, and that'll go all the way across. And that's what I meant before when I said I would kind of gesture to the underside of the rim when I did the painting. That's what that color does. It shows that there's a shadow there. Unfortunately, there was some technical difficulties with my camera and it stopped recording, but I will walk you through the rest of what I did. So for the pot, it had this kind of interesting clay marble texture, but I wasn't that interested in getting very into the texture, so I just indicated it simply with some curving, flowing lines that matched the way that the texture is flowing across the pot. And to indicate the very slight shadow on the left-hand side of the pot, I just kind of scrubbed those lines together to give it a light orange wash on that side. And then I also just finished up the coloring on the inside of the pot with the brown soil. I switched to using the very small brush for the soil, which helped me get some of these nice little textures and line work in there. I just held the brush very delicately, didn't press very hard, just held it loosely and kind of worked it across the paper to get those marks. Other thing I want to talk about really quick is I never ended up using this brush, the thick one, but if you don't want to deal with the texture of the pot, that would be the perfect time to use this brush because it's just such a broad, open space. This will help you fill that in a lot faster than either of the two smaller brushes. So now I'm going to move on to my favorite part, the ballpoint pen part of the project. This part is relatively simple and so fun because it really just pulls the whole piece together. All you're going to do is just take all of the primary elements of your cactus and your pot, and you're just going to outline it with the black ballpoint pen. So similar to the watercolor, I'm going to work from top to bottom so that I don't smudge as much as possible. And I'm just going to still always be looking at my reference photo. And I'm just going to take my pen and start adding these detailed lines in there. It can be a little tricky drawing with pen on watercolor paper just because of how textured it is. I would say don't worry too much about getting all lines perfectly straight. Having a little bit of wiggliness or variation can actually add to kind of the personality of your artwork. Don't worry about it too much. This is what I dread, is that there will be some little wet part of ink that I'll put my hand in. I'll move my hand and it will carry over to other parts of the artwork. That is exactly what happened. So now I have these little kind of dots here. And that is obviously not ideal, but it's okay. I'm gonna try and figure out a way to make that look better. But for now, I won't worry about it. I'll just keep tracing the cactus. And you can already see how the pen really pulls the drawing together. I'm actually gonna turn it upside down so I'm not dragging my hand through any more pen. There's the shapes of my cactus. I love those shapes. They remind me almost of crystal shapes, which I think is a really beautiful kind of shape with those faceted edges. I'm not gonna worry about the needles yet. That'll be really close to the end. I'm gonna first work on the pot. And now it's time for the little cactus needles. I'm not gonna outline the soil, and that's just a stylistic choice. I kind of like how it looks with just the color. But if you want, you could even outline in more detail than I'm doing. Just know that this way of doing it is pretty controlled. So if you're just outlining the shapes, it's gonna have that clean look. If you start to add a lot of extra detail, it could look really cool. I don't want to discourage you from trying that by any means, but it just might not look as clean. So I'm noticing that these cacti needles kind of have a little ball at the base, and then they stick up from that little ball. So I'm gonna draw in these little balls first. The thing that's great about this is it actually helps define those fins even more, because you can see there's no needles on the inside part where the fin dips down. This one's interesting because it doesn't really have a very defined line of the fin, but it does have needles that go down there. So I'm going to draw that. It's pretty interesting. And I'm just trying to follow it as accurately as possible. Again, always looking at my reference photo. If you don't want to be so precise with your own, you don't have to. You can just kind of be more stylistic with it, make it more like a pattern. So there you have it, one lovely cactus watercolor outlined in ink. And that concludes the ink portion of the artwork. You're pretty much done. If you want, you can add some typography. You can add that. If you want to add any more decoration to your drawing, you could do that. Maybe add a pattern in the background. And I am going to add some typography. If you're interested in seeing how I do typography, I'll be making another video that talks about calligraphy, and then I'll make another video in the future that talks about creating more structured typefaces. I hope you enjoyed this video, learning how to make your very own watercolor cactus artwork. If you're interested in seeing more videos like this in the future, you can subscribe to our channel, and we'll be coming out with art tutorials on a regular basis. Everything from drawing tutorials to painting tutorials to videos like this where I'll walk you through how to do a whole art project from start to finish. Also, if you have any things you're particularly interested in learning about or videos that you would like to see in the future, I'd love to hear about it. So you can leave your comments down below and I will be sure to read all of those. I hope you enjoyed this video, and until next time.